Of all the great technologies that shaped humanity, the most enduring, the one that arguably has most shaped the human endeavor, is the story. We are a species of myth makers and storytellers. Entire civilizations, systems of belief, and worldviews are imagined, built, and maintained on a foundation of stories and myths, the great arc of human understanding. From our distant relatives huddled around primordial fires seeking warmth and light and protection, to the images dancing in the glare of our screens, we define the world and our place in it by the stories we tell and the myths we employ. Science and mathematics help us quantify immutable laws. Stories stand in the yawning cosmic chasm where time and space converge, helping us to understand what it means to be human in a dangerous, mysterious universe. The themes endure, cautioning us against hubris, inspiring reverence for the forces of nature, and imparting a sense of wonder in imagining other worlds. The story of humanity is just that, the story. Of the many challenges that climate change presents, forging a narrative that at once speaks to the enormity of the problem while maintaining a sense of hope and agency is, I suggest, the most daunting. We have the science well in hand regarding the impact of anthropogenic climate change. We have the tools to mitigate it. But we are failing to create a narrative that can bring a global population together to fight a common and existential predicament. Storytelling is an essential tool of understanding for all people and all generations. Younger readers, with their vivid imaginations unsullied by the vagaries of adult admonitions and calcified worldviews, are open to fantastical worlds and how things can be instead of how they are now. Nurturing this fertile ground of imagination is a means of empowerment, allowing the coming generations growing into a climate-changed world to cope, adapt, evolve, and thrive in a world they will create out of the ashes of the burning world they inherit. One of the things I like most about producing this podcast is learning about the journeys of the people I talk with, the concentric lines of intent, circumstance, and fate that lead them to do what they do. And today, my guest is Laurel Colless. Laurel is an Australian-New Zealander children's author and creator of the Peter Blue series of fantasy adventure novels aimed at preteen readers. The series blends mythic elements and fantastical adventure with real-world environmental issues, leveraging compelling narrative to teach science and environmental concepts. Colless studied comparative literature and Greek mythology at university. Her literary training didn't lead directly to writing novels, but instead to a 25-year career in sustainability in the corporate world throughout Asia, the United States, and Europe with companies like Mitsubishi and Nokia. However, her time in the corporate world left her frustrated with, as she puts it, the lack of progress in the grown-up world. So much potential to do something, and so little being done. In 2013, while living in Greece with her diplomat husband, Laurel attended an Al Gore climate reality leadership training. It was in Istanbul during the Gezi Park protest in Taksim Square, but I'll let Laurel tell that story. Nonetheless, the experience inspired her to do whatever she could to shape a better future for her two daughters and their generation. She returned to her love of mythic literature and set out to create Peter Blue, transforming the great stories of gods, monsters, mortals, and heroes into a new kind of myth. She arms her characters with courage, confident in the knowledge that together they have all they need to vanquish the storm lords. The series incorporates global environmental threats as central conflicts. The villainous Anthrogs, demons born from garbage dumps, represent environmental destruction, while Peter and his friends model teamwork and creative problem-solving. The books are acclaimed for their skillful balance of adventure, humor, and science education. As of this recording, the Peter Blue series currently has 3 titles. Eye of the Stormlord introduces eco-fantasy themes in Peter's adventures and challenges in combating climate threats. In Renegade Tales, Peter and his friends are sent to catch renegade imps and contend with a toxic yellow fog that leads them to discover deeper secrets and danger. The plot brings the characters into direct confrontation with environmental disasters. Knights Unite focuses on children advocates at an environmentalist school who must balance their developing ideals with real-world challenges. The book has been described as a fast-paced science fantasy Hogwarts with climate action. Listen in as Laurel expands on her work, philosophy, and life story. Like the young readers of her novels, you'll come away inspired and engaged, imagining a world free of Anthrogs and Stormlords. Let's go. Hello, Laurel Colless. Nice to meet you, and thank you for being on our podcast.
Thank you. Hi. Hi, Tom.
Laurel is the author of the Peter Blue series of books for young adults. What is the age range that you're targeting?
Actually, I've been targeting 9 to 12-year-olds, but I recently got recognition from the US Green Book Award where they placed it as a young adult book. So it does depend. I'm thinking upper middle grade to 13 or 14-year-olds. And also co-reading, because I think there's a lot in there also for adults or parents or caregivers, to co-read.
I would think so.
Yeah.
So in the Peter Blue series, you're blending magical realism with these urgent environmental themes. So what inspired you to use fantasy as a vehicle for communicating climate change to these young readers? And how do you balance the magic with realism in your storytelling?
Okay, that's a really good question. I appreciate that question because I did put quite a bit of thought into it. And, I've been doing this for more than 10 years now. But when I first started pulling together stories and ideas for this series of novels, I was asking myself, how am I going to do this? Because I had decided already I wanted a new kind of mythology or storytelling that would somehow raise awareness of the climate crisis. So that was my mission. But of course, I understand perfectly that for 9 to 13-year-olds, having an environmental mission and writing a kid's sort of thriller, I mean, it's quite hard to marry those two ideas. And if a kid gets a whiff from their parents that this isn't educational or environmental, they're going to go as far away from your book as they can. So I had to think, I knew climate change was going to be my big villain, but how do you represent that in a way which is compelling, entertaining, fun, not too scary, so kids could still be a little bit scared, but in the safety of their pajamas in the bedroom at story times. I did the masterclass, which Salman Rushdie has, and with such it was so perfect for me because he's the true master of having these fantasy overlays with a kind of realism or realistic backdrop. And I hesitate to use the term magical realism because I feel like that's somehow owned by the Latin Americans, the Gabriel Garcia Marquez and others who really made that their own. But I did want to have this idea that I wouldn't be world building. So I'm not making some kind of world that's over there that my child readers would get a free pass and feel like, oh, this is a problem that belongs over there, nothing to do with me. No, I wanted today's realistic problems, but I wanted to enter it through the imagination, I guess. So take it through the imagination. So I'm telling you too much. I guess the main point is I created monsters. So I went out and created monsters, weather monsters. And I was living in Greece at the time. I'm married to a diplomat. So I'm now living in Helsinki, by the way. So we're in slightly different time zones. But I decided that when I was living in Greece and I started delving into Greek mythology, which I'd studied at university, and I thought, what I'm going to do is create something, a new kind of myth that would be more relevant for today's children and could start to draw children in with these monsters. So I needed a name for the monsters. And I took a Greek word, which I had just learned. I've been living there a few months. And the word for mankind or humanity is anthropos, which is, we all know, we know that. Actually, we know it from anthropogenic climate change.
That's right.
Anthropology. So the word for humankind, I took that stem, anthro, and I put it together with the English word hog. That's no offense to pigs, I always say when I tell the story, because animals do not take more than their share generally when they're in the wild, whereas humans do. So the idea of overconsumption and human, not greed, but just taking more than we need because it's there, and putting that into the context of landfill and trash and marine litter and pollution and all the garbage that goes with overconsumption, and creating these monsters that are birthed out of pollution, and
Mhm.
basically they're birthed out of garbage, or
Mhm.
they're nature spirits in this kind of, as far as people can suspend their disbelief. I mean, a lot of people do talk to nature spirits and believe in nature spirits, but nature spirits that have been turned by pollution, showing up as weather monsters, showing up as very
Mm.
dangerous killer storms, wildfires, floods. You know
Interesting.
the drill.
Yeah.
I mean, this is
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I feel like I've managed to get some success with this, because in the book which I've just released, which just got this recognition as actually but this Night to
Okay.
Night. So this book has a sea monster, a sea beast, and it has, I guess you could say, if you're looking into mythology, indigenous, biblical, or Greek mythology, you could say that it has the look of a leviathan, if you've read your Old Testament, but it's also got the behavior of some of these monsters that showed up when Odysseus was the sailors in the great epic, Homeric epic. Odysseus runs across, I'm pretty sure he runs across these two quite famous sea monsters, Scylla and Charybdis, who I think is where the term rock in a hard place came from, because you've got to go through a narrow state and you have these two monsters. They suck seawater up and then they vomit it back onto the boat. And then they create a whirlpool. So that's what this
Uh,
is doing, except in my case, it's sucking up garbage seawater and vomiting that back into
oh,
school assembly. So I don't know. Once I start talking about this, I start to talk without stopping. So you better.
it's all very interesting. Yeah. So you take on these complex issues, pollution, biodiversity, all the climate related disasters. And there's this tension between these monsters that you're creating and your characters that are dealing with it. How do you approach these topics without overwhelming your readers? And how do you deal with the idea of eco anxiety that young people must be feeling?
Okay, well, eco anxiety is just definitely a real thing, and it's something we're talking more and more about. Children are actually being diagnosed, and it can be quite serious. For the purpose of this conversation, I'm not a psychiatrist, and when I'm talking about it, I'm talking more in the sense of you're feeling glum. This is also a really, uh, it's real. And I have two daughters. They were actually 9 and 12 when I started this project, and they're now graduating. My daughter
Right.
graduated on Saturday, but they had a lot of anxiety when I started working with the eco clubs. And of course, I made them come in and be part of my group,
Yeah.
teaching children as a volunteer when I lived in Greece, which was the first time in my life when I couldn't actually work. I didn't speak Greek. So I started volunteering, which is where this all grew up from. But eco anxiety comes for particularly in children when they go out and they learn something, for example, at school, or they read something, or they see it on TikTok, and then they go home. So they learn about the climate crisis and they're like, this is urgent. And then they go home and they see what their parents are doing or not doing, or their people,
Mhm.
leaders in their community or political leaders or in their church. They see that it's like, I still remember Greta Thunberg at the UN saying, nobody's doing anything. She
Right.
was
Yeah.
18.
I remember that.
And this is how kids sometimes feel. Or they have the opposite and they feel like this is so hopeless. There's nothing we can do. So, the
Yeah.
other side. So, what I've tried to do with the book, and I've been really mindful of this, and what I also tried to do in the environmental clubs was kid led action. So, take action. And I called the clubs the Carbon Busters Club just because I like to have the word carbon, which is quite scientific and is obviously something very relevant here.
Mm.
Bit tricky. I added the word carbon busting, as in reducing your climate footprint, looking for clever ways, or talking about, uh,
Right.
of course, we have all the other harmful greenhouse gases and other problems. But I wanted this idea of busting because it sounds a bit like bust a move, like do something, let's get going.
Right.
And that's
Right.
exactly what kids need to pull them out of this. Because, I do also worry sometimes that maybe I told my own children too much because I can remember one of my daughters crying for some nights about deforestation. And they had been
Yeah.
shown pictures of football fields. And then they'd been told
Yeah.
every 10 minutes in the Amazon, this many football
Right.
fields is going down. And
Right.
oh
Right.
no, I can't. I remember vividly some years ago when we moved back to Helsinki, where I am now, talking to a group of parents in a rather informal presentation on an environmental day. And one of the dads in the audience, when I was showing some of the things I was doing, he stood up at question time and said, "Do you really think we should be giving this much information to our kids?" And
Yeah.
I was a little bit taken aback. And maybe it was my bad because I just presumed, of course, we need to tell them because they're going to inherit this mess. We need to
Right.
get going.
E-
But I wonder if
exactly.
I was
Yeah.
being a little selfish because with my own children, I still don't tell them about Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. I'm keeping the magic alive, and they're 18 and 21. I like the idea of magic, but I also like the idea of
Yeah. Magic can be
right.
a vehicle to communicate realism.
I was hoping you say
Yeah.
that. Because the way Salman Rushdie put it is he said there's so many ways to tell the truth. And and sometimes using fantasy, it can be actually a more powerful way with children to sort of get
Well,
in at the problem and
it,
make it
it
feel somehow palatable and manageable.
digestible in a
Yeah.
way. Yeah, communicating climate change for anybody, for any age group, in my experience, that is the challenge. How do you talk to people about climate change? Now, in the adult world, you have maybe a different set of issues. At least here, where I am in the United States, you're fighting denialism,
Misinformation. Yeah. Yeah.
misinformation. Do you address that in?
Yeah. I have a character in this current book. He's actually the owner of the yacht that goes down. And I love him, Mr. Dean. He's an 80-year-old billionaire from Australia. And he's a sort of, well, I shouldn't name names, but you can imagine the kind of people I have built his character around. But he's also very loving and he's got a big, big heart. And he loves my main protagonist, Peter Blue. But he is an anthrog denier. And all the kids are like, he's an anthrog denier. And they've actually been out in book one and they've been fighting anthrogs, these huge storm lords. And then he's
Uh-huh.
like, nah, it's just a bunch of lies made up by governments to take away more of my. And then they're like, no,
Yeah.
no. And so he says, well, show me one of these anthrog thingies and I'll see. And sure enough, in the middle of the book, he meets the sea beast. And I just
And
love that
he's
because the kids are
he's converted.
yeah. And then he's converted and he starts using his money and his agency to get things done. So that's the best kind of denouement, in my
I-
opinion. Yeah.
yeah. We'd hope we can find some of those folks in real life.
Yeah, exactly. But to your
Uh,
point about adults, talking to adults, I'm more and
uh-huh.
more thinking that we should just steer away from even using the word climate crisis because
Yeah,
it's such an
I agree.
opportunity. I mean, addressing fossil fuel and addressing pollution, it's just an opportunity to co-create a better world, to co-create a world,
Mhm.
a healthier, cleaner world. It just, for me, is such a no-brainer. And I was lucky
Yeah,
enough, I was just going to say, it just came to my mind that I went to see the chairman of the IPCC who came to Helsinki a few weeks ago. And one of the things that he showed, I mean, it's all pretty dire news. He had a long PowerPoint presentation with all the numbers, and we're not close to our Paris
I
targets, but you know all this. But one of the things, he pulled up a slide, and the slide was called co-benefits. And he was drawing attention to the things that we can do that not only address these numbers, but have extraordinary other benefits to society, for job creation, wealth
yeah,
creation. Because, of course, solving the climate crisis is also about bringing everyone along, not just
right. I agree with you. I've had people ask me a lot how I communicate, how do I try to communicate climate change? And I've decided if it's possible to not even mention the word climate or climate crisis, especially steering around it, especially here in the United
Yeah.
States, you mention that and you're off.
There's so much baggage with the
Yeah,
phrase.
yeah, it's just baggage.
And also people are fearful because, so the government's going to take away my car or stop me from eating my beef, or the government wants
Right.
to
Yeah.
do this or that, and I won't be able to. Well, for example, I have firsthand experience in the grown up world living in Washington, D.C. back in 2006, 2007. So I don't know, it's going back a fair wage. I did one of the most, I would say, one of the most exciting and biggest projects of my life in my former career before I became a children's writer. I was working in Virginia Tech, and they gave me carte blanche and I came from Europe and I had all these big ideas about what the Europeans were doing. And I'd been working at Nokia, which, was a global success story at the time,
Uh,
Uh, and I said, why don't we do this kind of Bill Clinton style energy efficiency program where we bring building owners in and we take all the low hanging fruit for addressing the climate crisis, which is basically energy efficiency in big old building stock, decent
right.
sized buildings, 10 to 20 floors, and you'll be able to retrofit them using Virginia Tech technologies. We bring in the professors, we have these
Uh-huh.
multi-stakeholder discussions. We bring in the building owners, we bring in the federal government, and we bring in like Arlington County and other local governments. And we make this big project and raise awareness on how you can win, win, win. If you retrofit your building, you can basically within 7 years, according to the way we set this up, you could within 7 years have amortized all the loans for your upfront expenses through energy savings. Yeah, it's
Oh,
a perfect equation.
yeah.
And I was so excited to be pitching it. I was
Yeah.
kind of in the middle, bringing together the partners, talking about all the technologies and trying to bring everyone in. And then we got a lot of pledges. I mean, this is quite an old story now. I think it was 2008 when we launched. And we did actually get front page of the Washington Post. It was a big story.
That's
And
good.
all these
Yeah.
developers were coming to the press conference. And when you have the big money came to the press conference,
Yeah.
and
Right.
Virginia Tech was happy because they're a Blacksburg school a little bit out, and they wanted to get more of a presence in the National Capital Region, where they did actually have a campus in Alexandria. And I stayed with that for 5 years. And a lot of the building owners who pledged, so we said, let's try to get 100 buildings and we'll have all this avoided carbon emissions numbers that we can throw at the media, and it'll be so great. And how many people do you think really finally went ahead? Yeah, renter.
I'm afraid to ask.
Yeah, I mean, it was really,
We're
really slow. And then
Yeah.
people kept saying, I mean, of course, there were legitimate concerns as well, but people were saying, if I want to flip my building, I'm in it for the profit, then I've got
Right.
to sell forward the loan. It's complicated. And there were so many
Yeah, yeah.
excuses. And then, of course, we did have, I shouldn't
The recession.
underplay it. We had the recession, which came. But at the same time, there were lots of pledges of a big amount of energy efficiency investment dollars. I wasn't planning to talk to you about this, but as a
That
memory, it
that's
was an
fine.
example of how grown-ups sometimes feel compelled and sometimes really are compelled to put short-term financial gains ahead of long-term sensible decision making.
Yeah.
And I'm sympathetic to that too. It's not easy for
Yeah.
parents also to always be able to, sometimes these things
Do
come at
you
a premium.
Right. Do you address short-termism or long-term those issues in any way in the books?
I'm
Thinking
trying
with
to
the
all the
long
time
term?
because it's top of mind. But these are still like kids' adventure stories. But the grown-ups are usually one step behind in these books. So the book is a school series, if I can jump back to the books. So what you would call sort of ensemble literature where you have a big group. Peter Blue is my protagonist, and he's sort of modeled, I'll be very open, he is modeled around the boy Arthur. I feel like that's the only big
The
story. And Harry Potter
the
is
hero
modeled
king.
around it as well. But I didn't. model it around Harry Potter. I modeled around T.H. White's original beautiful novel from 1932 called The Once and Future King, which is a lovely piece of literature that follows the whole story of Arthur, King Arthur. But of course, we're most fascinated by the lovely time at the beginning when he's with Merlin. And I do have a Merlin type character who's the forest mentor at the school. So it's a school series, and the kids come from everywhere. And it's the top ecodemic, we call it. So the top ecodemic kids from all around the world. So everyone's speaking English, but no real culture or language is highlighted. It's just the culture of the school, which is to take the intelligence from every possible source. So it's high tech, but it's also nature intelligence. And the school is what makes it, what gives me some depth in the storytelling is that the school is run by a larger organization, a grown up organization called Gaia intended. But that's an
Yeah.
acronym, the Global Advanced Intelligence Agency. And there's an element of the
Okay.
Pentagon sort of meets Hogwarts. I mean, there's a whole bit. You have real grown-ups who are trying to do all this stuff and they're
Yeah.
sharing a lot. I mean, they have these very advanced Anthrog warfare technology devices and helicopters called goshawks, but they also talk to frogs. And they're
Yeah.
always telling the children that nature has so much to tell us if we'd only just get better at listening. So I very much have brought that together that you have all of the intelligence. The intelligence is available to be tapped into. And that's the environment that the children are in, which I love. And of course, they all have different strengths. So one of the side characters who now is getting her own book, she is able to communicate with nature spirits. She's always been able to. And some of the others scoff at this. So I always have like the
Uh-huh.
two sides, and the others can't see what she's seeing. So, it's pretty.
So it sounds like you're addressing perhaps how we relate to nature, our relationship with nature. Is there a juxtaposition between technology and nature in your books?
I hope there is because that's what I set out to do. For example, in book two, Renegade Tales, which is centered around these massive winds, attacking winds, renegades. Wanda is the main character who comes forward in that book. And she is very high tech with her gadgetry and her phones. And she's got very ambitious. She's actually, sorry to say, but she's big voice, big everything. And she's American, but she's
Well,
brilliant. Yeah. And she signs up for everything and she charges forward. She does it partly because she wants to be best and to be first, but she also does it because she's big hearted and got a big vision. And she uses her phone in a way that is, of course, building up her social media complex, but she also solves a massive natural disaster problem where they have to actually work with nature intelligence. And she finds a way to use her phone to do that. I don't want to be a spoiler and it's too hard to explain. Going,
right, right.
but I really wanted, so no one's ever asked me that. So that is actually a real example
Yeah.
where it's not just about cold technology, but we want to use everything that we're empowered with. For example, Peter
Right.
has a jacket. So all the Gaia agents who are like these top global intelligent
Yeah.
people, men and women,
Yeah.
they wear Gaia jackets, which are wearable devices, very intelligent wearable devices. And Peter has one that he inherited from his dad. But Peter, my main character, he's much more like me. He's kind of a flake, not very good with technology. He's got a
Uh,
wonderful big heart and he's like typo blood. He goes with everything. But his dad is a big adventurer who gets into a lot of trouble. And he had inherited his dad's jacket, but he doesn't really know how to use it. But luckily, his best friend, Rolly, knows everything because his best friend, Rolly's dad, works for Gaia and he mends these Gaia jackets. So he knows everything about how stuff works. And then Peter, when he learns how to use the Gaia jacket, he invariably gets it wrong. And then the Gaia jacket becomes sort of something more because Peter has a lot of light. And I don't want to go too deep in.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're meeting the generation where they are as technologically, the
Yeah.
phone, and these are things that are just they grew up with. It's part of their
Exactly. And I'm the same as you,
DNA.
I have to remember. I was an old mum, so while I was writing these stories, my kids were growing up because I was late with my children. So I was quite lucky that way. Because, for example, I was writing a scene this morning where I had Chew, who's actually one of my favorite characters. He's very rational. And he pulled out a piece of paper to show his plan. And I realized after I'd written it, of course, he wouldn't pull out a piece of paper. He would just hear the whole thing
Right.
like on a
Yeah.
screen. Right?
Paper.
I'm like,
Writing?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So things like that, to your point.
Yeah. Yeah. So are there 4 books published right now
No,
available?
there's this one origin story that I wrote first in 2016. Peter grew up in an old folks' home because his dad was out adventuring and getting lost. So it's kind of Peter's story of how he got to Spiral Hall, which is the school where the action takes place.
Oh,
And
I
that's a
see.
kind of foundational story that maybe I think kids who really get to love Peter might want to go back to. But at the moment, I'm thinking of these 3 which are published: Eye of the Storm Lord, Renegade Tales, and Knights Unite. They're thrillers. They're mini thrillers. It's like Hardy Boys meets Harry Potter meets the Famous Five. So you have these ensemble groups solving big problems and getting
Big
into
problem.
all kinds of big trouble.
That's an important point too, I think, is communicating to young people that they address these huge, complex, seemingly overwhelming issues.
Exactly. Yeah. And that they have to, because usually
Yeah.
they're quite reluctant. But usually I
Yeah.
leave them with no choice. So it's like you put them up a tree and throw rocks at them. Who said that? And then bring them down. So that, I'm putting them into these fixes. And also, really want to make the point that it takes teamwork usually to get out of it, which is how we're going to have to work together on the real life crisis. As I got deeper into the storytelling and looking at mythology, I noticed something which I'd like to share with you because it's been weighing on me.
Mm.
If you look at the mythology, at least in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, we look a lot at Greek myths. This is a classic example. You take the story of the Minotaur in Crete, the Cretan Minotaur, and the story of Theseus. That problem was something that the adults in that city had created. I mean, it was to do with old problems created by people from the past. And then who gets to go into the labyrinth? The virgins or the 8 children? I can't remember. It depends
Mhm.
on the 7 boys and 7 girls have to go in and suffer the consequences every year. So finally,
Uh-huh.
Odysseus, who had nothing to do with the problem from the outset, has to come in and fight the Minotaur to finish things off finally. And luckily, he has Ariadne with her golden string to use her savvy and her smart to help him. So there's a lot of stories like that. Also biblical stories where the town behaved badly and not listened to the gods,
Yeah.
and then it's invariably the young people that have to come in. So we're
Yeah.
following the script here.
So were you always a writer? Were you always an author?
No,
What
no,
did you do before you wrote these books?
what I did was I studied literature at university and thought that that's where I was going to head. And so I graduated as a literary comparatist, and I did my thesis on medieval poetry. And I was like going deep into Gawain and the Green Knight and these kinds of things, and looking at imagery and looking at this ancient storytelling. So it was already there somehow simmering below the surface.
Mhm.
But I grew up in New
Mm.
Zealand, which for people who don't know, it's even below Australia at the bottom of the world. So as soon as the day I graduated, I actually flew to Italy and I started building a life in the Northern Hemisphere because I felt like I wanted to see what was going on. And before long, I ended up in Japan. So I'm really showing my age now because at that time, when I went to Japan, kids in primary school in New Zealand were studying Japanese. And now those same kids will be studying Chinese, I'm sure, who want you looking at Asian languages. But then it was a Japan boom. And I ended up joining Mitsubishi and becoming a corporate person. Met my Finnish husband in Tokyo, and he took me way north, as far north as you can go, really, coming if you start south in New Zealand. And I ended up working for Nokia for some years during the boom. And that was really like going back to university and studying business because it was a really
Mm.
successful company and there was a global matrices I was working in, and I learned so much. and then ended up at Virginia Tech when my husband became the Finnish ambassador to US and had a 6-year
Uh,
tenure there during Obama's first term and George W. Bush's second term. And
yeah.
so that's when I had the Virginia Tech stuff. And that's when I also made this pivot because I just got so disheartened by the lack of progress in the grown up world and started.
Right.
My husband got a posting in Greece sort of on the way home to Finland. And we got there right as the economy imploded, 2012 or 13. I'm trying to remember. There was no
Yeah.
chance of me having a job or doing anything other than this volunteering, which was in a way a gift when I look back, a gift to me, because I
Hmm.
started the books then and started working with the upcoming generation.
Yeah. And you did the Al Gore climate reality
Yeah, I did that from Greece,
training
actually. Yeah.
in Greece.
But no,
Okay.
I did. I
Yeah. What
went from Greece and did it in Turkey.
from?
You've also done
Oh,
it.
I did it. It was in San Francisco.
Okay, lovely. How long ago was that?
In I think 2012, I believe it was.
Okay, so you before me. I did it in 2013, I think. Yeah. So just
Ah, okay.
after you.
Okay.
But I think I probably have a better story than you because I went to Turkey alone, and Gore had decided to do it in the I don't remember the hotel, but it was an American hotel. But he did it right on Taksim Square, right when the uprising that weekend
Ugh.
occurred,
Oh,
the famous one.
wow.
It was actually
Yeah.
relevant because it was young people trying to save a park. So it was beautifully relevant. I had booked my hotel on that Taksim Square, just a little hotel, and I couldn't get back to it. I was out all night with tear gas sitting in the gutter.
Wow. Yeah. You have a better story than I do, for sure.
But at
Yeah.
that time, we were, it's changed now, but Al Gore invited everyone to make their own heroic goal to go with the training. And so I chose the books and working on this project as my goal. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's about,
So the Al Gore training was the
yeah.
inspiration to do the books. Interesting. That's interesting. Okay. I think it's very important what you're doing because we adults are leaving the younger generation with existential crisis,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And any way that you can communicate that. What sort of feedback have you been getting from your book series?
Oh, well, people are praising them. So I've got two types of audiences. My issue is I have to always be pitching to adults to try to persuade them to buy the book so that they would then give it to the children to read. And it's quite hard to market directly to children. So I'm, of course, going on two prongs. I'm going down the literary avenues and also down the environmental, talking to people like Jane Goodall and people who might want to give me an endorsement, but also going for editorial reviews. And actually, I was really pleased with my most recent Kirkus review, which described the whole series as, let me just get this right. Colless has created a kind of Hogwarts that operates on the magic of environmental awareness. And I thought that was like music to my ears because if someone's going to compare it with Harry Potter, one of the most successful
Yeah.
series we've ever seen in middle grade, I'm happy. But the problem is it's so hard to market and get. I'm still going for critical mass. I'm selling the books all around the world in English speaking countries. But kids don't talk about the environment. They just talk about the storytelling and which character they like best. And that's good.
Right.
Happy with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That can plant the seed.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping. And if it doesn't, if it doesn't, the other upside, where we were talking about co-benefits before, the other upside is if a kid reads my book just for the pure enjoyment, at least they're reading, right?
At least they're reading. Exactly.
Because literacy
Yes.
numbers are about as bad as the climate numbers going in the other
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, in both counts, that's great. Encourage people to read, young people to read. They get into the stories. If they don't become great environmental champions, at least they might be readers,
Exactly.
which makes them critical thinking and better in the world.
Yeah.
Co benefits, like
Yeah.
you say.
Yeah.
Well, anything you'd like to tell my listeners before we wrap it up?
Well, I'd love your listeners
Read the
to go and
books.
take a look. I mean, if you go actually on to get the ebook, it's quite low price because I really want parents maybe to download the Kindle, take a look, and then
Okay.
consider buying the paperback for their children. So I've deliberately kept the ebook quite low if you go onto Amazon I don't know if you're able to put any links in the show notes, but
I will, definitely.
that would be really great.
Yeah.
And also to contact me and give me your ideas and tell me what you think, because it's quite a lonely business being an author and trying to
Right.
figure this out.
Right.
But the only way for me now is forward. I'm going to keep going. I've got at least 3 or 4 more books to write. And then I don't know if I can spin this off also into journals or other educational materials. But leading with the
Yeah.
storytelling.
Yeah. Yeah. Then maybe a movie someday.
Oh, hi. Yeah, sign me up. I would love that.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Laurel. I appreciate the work you're doing and our conversation. And
So,
all your links will be in the show notes. It's great to see people that are addressing the issue in a, as positive a way as possible and making it accessible, because it's such a difficult topic, especially communicating this to young people. So I think it's great that you're doing this.
Tom. And actually, I think hope is something we didn't talk about, but we probably should.
Right.
Because when it comes to working with children, the doom and gloom doesn't sell that well. Like it
Right. No, I definitely agree. Yeah. Doom and gloom.
Yeah.
It's
land, hope, and
it's easy to fall into that, but it doesn't help.
yeah, and also humor. We didn't talk about humor either. But
Humor.
I mean, of course, I'm not trying to write jokes, but I'm always mindful that I'm throwing these characters together, and they're so flawed and they're so fun in their own right. So just putting them together is a great way to generate humor as well.
Humor and hope.
Yeah.
Humor and hope.
On that note,
we'll leave it there.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And let's keep in touch. See.
Yeah, definitely.
Hats off to what you're doing. Don't give up.
Yeah. Maintain hope. That's all we can do. Either that or give up, and that's not.
No, we can't.
That's
and
not
if we've got kids in our life, we can't do that. And there are so many different ways that you can look at where your agency is and how to address a problem. So, and make it fun.
Make it fun, and maintain hope, and maintain a sense of humor. In addition to her writing, Laurel is the founder of the Carbon Busters Club, a kids' climate science program that combines storytelling with science education. My hat's off to Laurel Colless for focusing her talent and efforts on helping young people and their parents imagine a world where we vanquish weather monsters, storm lords, and Anthrogs. Check the show notes for more information about Laurel and the Peter Blue series. And if you like what we do, please subscribe to the podcast. If you're so inclined, you can also donate $1 or $2 for the cause, with our profound gratitude. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on Global Warming is Real. There's always more we can do to stop climate change. No amount of engagement is too little, and now, more than ever, your involvement matters. To learn more and do more, visit globalwarmingisreal.com. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Tom Schoeneman. We'll see you next time on Global Warming is Real.